A breathtaking megacity unfolds beneath the radiant light of day, where colossal skyscrapers rise like towering pillars of steel against an endless sapphire sky. The city pulses with overwhelming modern energy, stretching toward a distant horizon that seems to go on forever. At its center, massive glass towers reflect the sunlight with a cold yet commanding brilliance, standing dominant within the labyrinth of concrete and steel. Vast clusters of white clouds drift above the skyline, adding depth and a powerful sense of freedom to the sprawling urban landscape. A shimmering river wraps around the city beneath the natural daylight, creating a soft contrast between nature and modern architecture. Harbors, riverside highways, and endless rows of towering buildings form a striking visual rhythm, making the entire scene feel both majestic and alive. The crystal-clear light of a summer afternoon evokes the feeling of a modern world driven by ambition, a place where monumental stories are destined to begin. The colossal city appears as the steel heart of modern civilization, stretching endlessly beside vast rivers that mirror the sunlight. Skyscrapers stand tightly packed together, forming a gigantic architectural maze that feels both ordered and chaotic, as though the entire metropolis is constantly moving beneath layers of cold glass and concrete. The skyline radiates the luxurious power of a futuristic supercity. Bridges connect distant urban districts, adding immense scale and reinforcing the sense of a gigantic world operating without rest. Massive white clouds drift slowly above the city, softening the harshness of the towering structures and creating a fragile balance between nature and modern civilization. The clear afternoon light washes the entire skyline in tones of silver blue. Morning sunlight pours through the towering glass walls of a high-rise building, bathing the room in a pale golden glow filled with luxury and loneliness. A man in a dark suit stands silently beside the window, holding a steaming cup of coffee as he gazes toward the distant skyline of the sprawling city below. Beyond the transparent glass, skyscrapers emerge faintly through the natural light, creating the feeling of a cold yet ambitious modern world. The tallest tower rises against the pale blue sky like a symbol of limitless power and desire. Half of the man's face is illuminated by soft sunlight, emphasizing his calm, mature, and contemplative expression. His perfectly tailored suit and upright posture project the image of a successful businessman. His expression is heavy with thought, his distant gaze suggesting he is weighing a decision that could change the course of his entire life. The silence within the frame creates a profound sense of isolation amid a world of luxury, where success and pressure always coexist. A blazing streak of purple energy tears across the frame like a bolt of plasma lightning, reflecting against the glass facades of the skyscrapers within the modern city. A burst of blinding light floods the skyline with surreal neon violet, as though a technological gateway has suddenly activated in broad daylight. In the foreground, a hand in a dark business suit lifts a white porcelain cup. The businessman has unintentionally become the witness to an event that defies the laws of physics during an ordinary coffee break. The glass windows reflect the blue sky and the city's cold concrete structures, amplifying the growing tension. The man in the elegant black suit is no longer composed. Every trace of corporate calm has vanished from his eyes. His pupils shrink in shock, his eyes widened as though he has just witnessed the impossible unfolding before him. Deep wrinkles carve across his forehead beneath the harsh natural light pouring through the windows behind him, revealing overwhelming confusion and fear. It is primal terror, the arrival of something beyond human comprehension. In the middle of a crowded city street, a yellow taxi violently explodes in the center of traffic, transforming an ordinary rush hour into a blazing nightmare. A gigantic fireball erupts with savage force, consuming the vehicle in waves of orange flames and spiraling black smoke rising into the sky. Metal fragments and dust are hurled violently into the air. Nearby cars freeze amid the chaos, while distant pedestrians stand paralyzed in shock or begin fleeing as the explosion shatters the peace of the city block. Towering buildings on both sides of the avenue form a gigantic concrete canyon, making the blast feel even more suffocating and violent, as though the entire city is echoing with the aftershock of a catastrophic terrorist conspiracy. The flames reflect across the asphalt and nearby vehicles, drowning the entire scene in the scorching colors of destruction. This is no longer a traffic accident, it is the terrifying beginning of something far worse. At the heart of a smoke-filled avenue, overwhelmed by chaos, the burning yellow taxi lies across the road. Massive columns of black smoke spiral upward into the sky, thick and suffocating, blotting out the daylight beneath an ash-gray haze. Red-orange flames crawl across the twisted metal frame, reflecting off shattered glass and scorched steel with an atmosphere of unbearable heat, danger, and despair. Concrete debris, shattered glass, and metal fragments are scattered across the street as though a devastating explosion has ripped the district apart. Towering buildings stand on both sides, like silent walls, surrounding the chaos. Other vehicles remain frozen in panic, barely visible through the expanding smoke and dust. It is the beginning of an invasion destined to destroy humanity. Close to the cracked asphalt, the feet of an alien creature descend onto the shattered roadway with terrifying calmness. Its pale white skin, coated with glossy shades of purple, reflects the cold daylight with an appearance both biological and mechanical, a being that does not belong to the human world. Razor-sharp black claws slowly touch the ground with overwhelming authority, as though every step carries a death sentence for the city ahead. The glossy skin, the organic purple armor plating along its legs, and the rough dust-covered asphalt create a disturbing contrast. Even without revealing its face, the creature radiates absolute dominance, like a god of destruction descending upon Earth. The atmosphere becomes still, heavy, and foreboding, signaling that a massacre or catastrophic battle is about to begin. What a lively place. Frieza's face twists into a warped smile, his glowing red eyes savoring the fear of the entire world. His cold white skin stretches over a perfectly sculpted body like polished stone, contrasted by glossy purple armor-like surfaces on his head and shoulders, a monstrous beauty both flawless and horrifying. He leans forward like a predator closing in on its final prey, creating unbearable tension. His narrow eyes burn with confident madness while sharp teeth emerge through a cruel grin, turning his entire expression into something deeply sadistic. Every wrinkle, every small scar illuminated beneath the cold, natural light of the empty street makes him feel less like a creature and more like a nightmare brought to life. It is the terrifying silence before an eruption of violence, where the villain does not need to scream or attack to make the world tremble with fear. From a dizzying height, among the ancient stone buildings of the city, Krillin, a small warrior, clad in a bright orange guise, stands precariously atop a giant gargoyle statue. He stares down at the avenue below, where the burning taxi spews thick black smoke into the sky like the omen of a disaster spreading throughout the metropolis. Krillin plants his feet firmly on the weathered stone sculpture, lifting his face with an expression torn between horror and determination. His orange martial arts uniform stands out against the cold gray palette of concrete and smoke. Every fold of fabric strains in the wind, every tightened muscle revealing the urgency of someone who has discovered a threat beyond imagination. He stands as a lone hero balanced between civilization and annihilation. Far below, cars and people appear like tiny dots. It feels like the moment before the final battle, a solitary warrior preparing to face a force capable of drowning the entire city in fire and darkness. This can't be possible. Panic overwhelms Krillin's face. His shaved head glistens with sweat and dust beneath the harsh sunlight cutting across his features. Every drop of sweat sparkles like evidence of unbearable pressure and fear. His trembling eyes widen, brows tighten, and lips part with ragged breaths, the expression of someone witnessing something far beyond the limits of his understanding and strength. The emotion becomes suffocatingly real. Deep lines across his forehead, sweat-covered skin, and constantly shifting eyes reveal tension pushing Krillin toward the edge of collapse. This is no ordinary fear, it is the despair of a warrior realizing the threat before him could destroy everything. Behind him, the blurred silhouette of the gargoyle looms like a ghost watching over the city, intensifying the ancient and ominous atmosphere. A nightmare is approaching. No explosion or battle is needed to understand it, a catastrophe is about to consume the entire city. Chaos erupts across the city streets. At the center stands a woman in a gray business suit, eyes wide with terror, both hands covering her mouth as though struggling to suppress a scream. Her face is frozen in absolute fear. Behind her, dozens of office workers flee in panic through the massive streets of the modern city. Some stumble onto the pavement, adding to the overwhelming sense of disorder and loss of control. Humanity itself seems to be running for survival. The cold, gray daylight creates an atmosphere of unbearable tension, like the final moment before a colossal disaster strikes. In the heart of the city, crowds sprint in desperation as though escaping an invisible horror behind them. High heels pound against the pavement, dress shoes slam across the asphalt, skirts whip violently through the air, every movement driven by pure survival instinct. The ground trembles beneath the stampede, dust and debris explode upward into the air while gray light and drifting smoke bury the background beneath a suffocating haze. Something massive and terrifying is approaching behind the fleeing crowd. It feels like the beginning of a large-scale invasion where survival is measured only by desperate footsteps. Frieza, his white and purple body gleaming beneath the chaos, raises one arm and unleashes a blazing crimson sphere of energy, crackling with violent lightning, tearing the air apart around it. A massive explosion erupts in the street behind him, black smoke twisting together with blazing orange flames to create an apocalyptic atmosphere. Civilians flee in terror, their faces filled with helpless fear as they attempt to escape an unstoppable force of destruction. The red light from the energy blast reflects across Frieza's body, making the villain appear overwhelmingly powerful, like a god of annihilation descending upon the human world. Frieza stands in the center of the avenue as the embodiment of destruction itself. One arm extends forward as a crimson energy beam rips through the atmosphere, carving a burning scar across the frame. The light from the beam reflects against his muscular body and glossy biomechanical armor. His cold expression and cruel smirk reveal complete control over the chaos unfolding around him. Office workers flee in panic through intersections between towering skyscrapers beneath the cold gray atmosphere of a collapsing city. The villain dominates the entire scene while the fleeing crowd appears insignificant, fragile humans desperately trying to survive against an unstoppable power. A small yet terrifying alien warrior stands amid the shattered street, his glowing white and purple body surrounded by smoke, dust, and chunks of concrete hurled through the air. From his outstretched arm, a colossal crimson energy beam erupts across the screen like a force capable of incinerating everything in its path. People scatter in every direction, their faces overwhelmed by fear and despair. The blinding red light from the energy blast reflects across the streets, the skyscrapers, and the terrified civilians fleeing through the city, the very center of a catastrophe where everything trembles beneath uncontrollable, destructive power. Humanity is now facing an extraterrestrial entity whose power exists far beyond the limits of mankind. A wave of destruction had just torn through the heart of the city. Along a vast boulevard surrounded by towering skyscrapers, a massive traffic light pole was ripped from the pavement and hurled to the ground in a thunderous explosion. Clouds of dust billowed into the air, as shards of steel and concrete scattered violently across the sky, as if the entire street had been crushed by an invisible force. Office workers stood frozen in shock or fled the scene in panic, their faces twisted with terror at the sudden catastrophe. Small fires ignited among the wreckage, casting flickering orange light against the cold gray tones of smoke and urban concrete. Dust-filled air, debris flying in every direction, violent impacts shaking the streets, the city itself seemed to be collapsing beneath the wrath of a supernatural force, or an alien invasion, where every passing second carried new danger and uncontrollable chaos. Krillin hurled himself from the edge of a skyscraper, his body suspended in midair. Arms spread wide, legs reaching desperately beneath him. Far below stretched an endless avenue lined with stalled traffic and razor-sharp white crosswalk markings. A yellow taxi burned violently in the middle of the street, black smoke spiraling upward through the traffic jam. The hero was diving headfirst into destiny, caught between the fragile lines separating heroism and chaos. Krillin descended rapidly toward the disaster zone. His sprint carried desperate momentum, his small figure dwarfed by the enormous intersection, like a lone hero arriving at the exact moment the city plunged into madness. Pedestrians at the street corner scattered in fear while shadowy figures ran from the burning wreckage. Other vehicles remained trapped along the endless boulevard, creating the unsettling feeling that city life continued despite the catastrophe unfolding right before everyone's eyes. Only seconds remained before a suffocating collision of unimaginable scale would erupt in the center of the intersection. So the little rat finally showed up, Frieza said. Frieza's face looked cold and twisted beyond anything human. His smooth pale skin was carved with razor-sharp ridges that made him appear terrifyingly unnatural. His glowing red eyes stared forward with the delight of a predator savoring the chaos behind him. His grin stretched unnaturally wide, revealing flawless white fangs sharpened to perfection. Dark violet tones around his lips and the purple plates across his body gave him the appearance of a merciless emperor, powerful, emotionless, utterly cruel. Smoke churned through the shattered streets as terrified civilians fled through the collapsing city. Somewhere in the haze, the burning yellow taxi still flickered among the ruins. Frieza became even more horrifying because he stood perfectly still while the world behind him crumbled apart. Cold light washed over his pale gray skin, giving it the texture of lifeless metal, while the crimson glow in his eyes felt almost demonic. The villain was not merely dangerous, he was enjoying the fear surrounding him. In the middle of the deserted avenue lined with towering skyscrapers, the bald martial artist in his blazing orange guise stood alone in the center of the road like the last warrior left alive after the apocalypse. His eyes were sharp, completely focused, body lowered into a powerful combat stance, ready to unleash the decisive strike. Above his raised hand spun a gigantic golden energy ring, rotating violently while radiating light like a miniature sun inside the gray urban wasteland. The glow reflected across the windows of nearby skyscrapers, painting the entire street in surreal shades of gold while smoke drifted behind him. Krillin stood low and grounded like steel driven into asphalt, one arm extended forward in menace while the other held the blazing energy disk above his head. The aura burned so intensely that the entire city around him seemed drowned in molten gold. Tiny bolts of electricity crackled around the spinning ring, suggesting power far beyond control, moments away from erupting into pure destruction. Krillin's face tightened with strain, mouth open in a roar, as he unleashed the last of his strength, eyes locked onto an unseen target ahead. Destructo Disc! Krillin shouted as he hurled the energy disc forward. The entire city seemed to shake in that instant. Across the empty boulevard, the gigantic golden ring tore through the air at terrifying speed, leaving behind blazing trails like a fallen sun racing through the streets. The spinning energy vortex burned with plasma-like intensity, its golden light reflecting across asphalt and glass towers alike. The warrior who launched it was no longer visible, only raw unstoppable power remained, surging forward like a divine weapon. The city transformed into a battlefield consumed by supernatural warfare, where a single strike could erase entire blocks in seconds. The attack ripped through the empty avenue like a bullet tearing across the city. The blazing golden disc spun with impossible velocity, skimming only centimeters above the pavement while leaving behind burning trails like sacred fire devouring space itself. Towering skyscrapers formed a cold concrete corridor around the projectile, making the supernatural energy at its center appear even more overwhelming. Golden reflections danced across windows and black asphalt, as though the entire city had been swallowed by a storm of light. Its speed surpassed human comprehension. Distant figures became nothing more than blurred shadows, as if no one had yet realized that the force racing toward them possessed enough power to obliterate everything in its path. An ultimate attack had been unleashed, cutting through the modern city like the weapon of a god. For a few brief seconds, the entire world seemed to hold its breath before the inevitable impact. Frieza tilted his head slightly, smirking with mocking amusement, his narrowed crimson eyes savoring his opponent's despair. Not a trace of tension appeared on his face, only the icy confidence of a being who believed himself superior to all life. Frieza had effortlessly dodged Krillin's attack. The glowing golden disc streaked through the smoke like a blazing meteor, leaving a burning scar of light across the ruined street. Frieza remained standing calmly in its path, as though the devastating attack was beneath his concern. Black smoke spiraled upward between shattered skyscrapers while the distant horizon glowed from the impending collision. Krillin's energy disc slammed into a towering building. The skyscraper exploded as if torn apart by an invisible god. Massive sections of brick and steel burst from the structure and spiraled into the smoke-filled sky. Floor after floor collapsed in a violent chain reaction, exposing the hollow concrete skeleton beneath like the bones of a dying giant. The street below remained eerily empty and silent, a horrifying contrast to the destruction raging above. Gray smoke spread through the urban canyon while dim light swallowed the city in a suffocating atmosphere where time itself seemed frozen the moment the tower began to fall. Amid shattered glass and drifting smoke, Android 18 stood balanced atop a wrecked police car. Her blonde hair whipped violently in the pressure waves while her cold eyes stared toward an unseen force in the center of the ruined city. Windows exploded into thousands of glittering shards around her. White smoke rolled across the street, swallowing damaged NYPD vehicles twisted by the devastating impact. The police car beneath her feet looked bent and broken as if it had absorbed a direct blast. The moment pulsed with tension and raw energy. Yet even within the chaos, Android 18 remained standing, small against the destruction, yet radiating defiance and strength like a symbol of rebellion amid the apocalypse. The blonde woman stood motionless in the middle of the road. Wind swept gently through her short disheveled hair while one hand gripped her head, as though trying to hold together memories shattered by catastrophe. Her eyes were cold yet exhausted, caught between panic and determination. The city's noise had vanished. No sirens, no crowds, only the crushing silence before the next storm. "So you're the Emperor, Shorty?" Android 18 said. Her face tightened with anger and worry, jaw clenched as if barely restraining an emotional eruption. "Insolence," Frieza snarled. Purple veins twisted across his skull, as though he were suppressing unimaginable power beneath his skin. His crimson eyes narrowed with murderous intent, sharp as blades piercing through the smoke. Teeth grinding, lips curled in fury, his expression became both monstrous and overwhelmingly arrogant, the face of a tyrant who viewed the world around him as insignificant dust. The towering city blurred beneath layers of gray ash and cold violet light. The final battle between supernatural power and dying humanity was moments away from erupting. It was the instant the villain lost control. His pale white skin looked smooth as porcelain yet lifelessly cold, while twisted purple veins crawled across his head like cracking streams of energy beneath the surface. His glowing red eyes radiated not only rage, but utter contempt for the world itself. His clenched teeth showed through a silent roar as his face twisted under uncontrollable fury. Even the atmosphere seemed strangled, smoke rising behind him, shattered streets stretching into silence, time itself pausing before annihilation. At the epicenter of destruction, Frieza stood towering over the ruined boulevard. One arm rose toward the sky, fingers curling as though crushing the air itself. Around him, the pavement exploded apart, chunks of concrete and debris lifting from the ground and floating weightlessly under overwhelming pressure. Massive clouds of dust surged down both sides of the street like gray tidal waves, swallowing the burning wreckage in the distance. Android 18 crossed both arms before her chest in a defensive stance as a turquoise energy barrier surrounded her body. The massive shield pulsed like living electricity, streams of light coursing across its surface beneath the battlefield haze. The street beneath her feet shattered apart under the tremendous force colliding with the barrier. Stones rose into the air, suspended inside the fading shockwave. Behind her, two NYPD cars blocked the road while white smoke drifted from ruined sidewalks, illuminated by the eerie blue glow, the final moment before destiny collided, where human will fought against power, capable of crushing an entire city. Frieza's pale gray body and cold violet armor reflected the dim light of the ruined metropolis while his burning red eyes glowed like embers through the smoke. One hand stretched forward, unleashing invisible force powerful enough to suspend boulders and debris in midair, as though space itself were bending beneath his wrath. The scene radiated overwhelming menace. Stones ripped through the smoke in cinematic slow motion while cold colors and oppressive lighting transformed the battlefield into the final seconds before global destruction. A supernatural force was crushing the entire city with a single gesture. Jagged bolts of lightning exploded wildly through the air. The pressure from the energy wave hurled massive chunks of concrete skyward, making it feel as though the entire boulevard were being pulverized beneath uncontrollable power. Smoke spiraled across the avenue while towering skyscrapers trembled around the expanding shockwave. Eerie blue light reflected through the haze, suggesting that one more collision could reduce the entire city to rubble. At the center, Android 18's silhouette was nearly swallowed by the blinding light and expanding energy storm. Her body strained beyond its limits, while her barrier resisted the overwhelming force unleashed by Frieza. After the attack, Android 18 stood motionless inside the heart of a gigantic pale blue energy sphere. The glowing shield surrounding her resembled a supernatural barrier, rippling constantly with white-blue lightning crawling across its surface. Massive stones and shattered concrete floated through the air around her, spinning wildly as if controlled by an invisible force. Android 18's gaze was cold, terrifyingly calm, a chilling contrast to the chaos erupting all around her. Beneath her feet, the asphalt split apart under waves of overwhelming energy pressure, rippling outward in violent surges. Thick clouds of smoke swallowed the distant skyscrapers, while the eerie blue glow of the energy sphere reflected across the city's cold gray sky. Her silence felt more terrifying than the explosions raging around her. At the peak of a colossal skyscraper in the heart of the endless metropolis, a green warrior stood with both arms spread wide toward the blazing heavens, as though embracing the entire world beneath him. His massive white cape whipped violently through the wind thousands of feet above the ground, creating an image both majestic and mythic against the burning sunlight on the horizon. The entire city stretched beneath him, towering buildings packed tightly together, rivers shimmering with the pale gold reflections of dusk. Shafts of golden light pierced through the clouds, forming cinematic halos around his body, giving the scene an almost divine presence. With arms outstretched in absolute power, the savior absorbed limitless energy, a warrior preparing to unleash enough force to change the fate of the entire city. Piccolo stood precariously atop the steel framework of a skyscraper, as though guarding the entire skyline behind him. His massive white cape thrashed violently in the wind. Cold light washed over the buildings far below, making the city seem tiny and distant, like an endless labyrinth. Piccolo's face was hardened and grim, his razor-sharp eyes staring into the abyss beneath him with the feeling of a battle on the verge of eruption. His dark purple outfit, green skin, and strange patterns running along his arms emphasized an appearance both inhuman and overwhelmingly powerful. "I won't miss this opportunity," Piccolo said. The green-skinned warrior clenched his jaw, his eyes blazing as though awakening a power beyond mortal limits. 2 fingers rose to his forehead, a brief but deeply threatening gesture, and in that instant, brilliant golden energy exploded outward, swallowing half his face in violent light. Tiny bolts of electricity crackled around his hand as though the air itself were being torn apart by invisible force. The heavy white cape wrapped around his shoulders trembled violently in the high-altitude winds. The skyscrapers behind him blurred into cinematic depth of field, forcing every ounce of attention onto the light gathering at his forehead, like a living weapon preparing to fire. The savage expression, the cold eyes, the veins bulging beneath green skin, it felt like the final seconds before the heavens themselves would tremble beneath an attack powerful enough to alter the entire battle. Amid smoke-covered streets and a sky swirling with massive black storm clouds, Frieza stood like the embodiment of the apocalypse itself. His marble-cold skin reflected the dim light of the incoming storm, while the glossy purple plates across his chest and shoulders made him appear perfectly alien and horrifying. His glowing red eyes burned beneath a deeply furrowed brow, filled with contempt, as though he was not looking at the city, but judging it. No explosions appeared within the frame, yet everything carried the feeling that catastrophe had already begun. Smoke coiled beneath Frieza's feet like the lingering scars of destruction that had just swept through the city. Towering buildings rose on both sides like a canyon of concrete, transforming the street into an arena for a war beyond human imagination. A face devoid of warmth, overflowing with murderous intent, like a nightmare walking through the heart of a dying city. Frieza's pale white skin appeared cracked, purple veins twisting across his forehead like signs of destructive power erupting from within. His glowing red eyes burned with absolute hatred, a gaze sharp enough to crush the last fragments of hope. His mouth opened in a silent roar of fury, revealing clenched teeth and twisted madness. Wrinkles tightened around his eyes and nose bridge, making his face resemble a war god newly awakened. Every rough detail of his skin was carved sharply beneath the grim lighting, creating an overwhelming sense of dread. "Finish him, Piccolo, now!" Android 18 stood frozen, stretched between terror and awakening power. Her head tilted toward the ash-gray sky, lips parted in a choked scream. Her eyes reflected both horror and awe, as though witnessing a force beyond human comprehension. An eerie green aura erupted around her body, staining her pale skin and blonde hair with a radioactive glow. Blue lightning burned violently through the air, making it feel as though reality itself were beginning to fracture under invisible power. The entire scene carried the tone of a dark superhero film moments away from total collapse. Behind her, the city drowned in chaos. Police cars blocked the streets beneath clouds of dust and smoke, their red and blue lights flickering weakly through the apocalyptic atmosphere. Debris littered the road like remnants of a battle that had torn through the district only moments earlier. Piccolo hovered in midair like an ancient god preparing to unleash final judgment. His face twisted with absolute concentration, teeth grinding so hard they trembled. Every wrinkle around his piercing eyes looked carved by sheer determination as he poured all his will into the energy before him. Above his raised palm burned a sphere of golden energy bright as a miniature sun. Its light erupted violently, reflecting across his rough green skin and his white cape whipping through the wind. White lightning tore through the air, spiraling around the sphere like uncontrolled currents as the atmosphere itself trembled beneath the overwhelming force gathering to its limit. Every vein along his arm bulged beneath stretched skin. The heavy fabric of his cape snapped violently in the storm. The intense golden light contrasted against the cold gray tones of the city below. Behind him, the skyscrapers blurred into the background while Piccolo stood like a figure of absolute authority, as though the fate of the entire city rested within his hand. His white cape thundered through the wind, carrying the weight of a war that would decide everything. Piccolo thrust his arm into the sky, his hand gripping the gigantic energy sphere blazing with violent fury. The orange-gold light erupted like a miniature sun, gigantoring sparks of electricity in every direction and reflecting across his hardened green muscles. Veins stretched across his arm under immense strain, revealing power compressed to its absolute limit moments before release. Then, in the center of the main avenue, a colossal pillar of energy tore through space itself, exploding downward like the wrath of a god crashing upon the earth. The blazing white gold beam descended from the heavens into the heart of the city with overwhelming force. It burned so brightly that every surrounding detail dissolved into pure light, transforming the entire avenue into a river of molten radiance, devouring everything in its path. Shockwaves erupted from the impact point in a massive halo, as though the earth itself had been pierced by an energy meteor. On both sides of the avenue, skyscrapers stood like helpless witnesses before catastrophe. Golden-orange reflections slid across glass windows and concrete walls, giving the city an atmosphere both magnificent and apocalyptic. From this height, the people and vehicles below looked like tiny specks desperately fleeing the center of annihilation. The massive energy blast ripped through the ruined street and slammed directly into Frieza's roaring body. Blinding white-purple light erupted like a miniature nuclear detonation, consuming the entire frame in violent energy. Jagged purple lightning crawled across the ground like living serpents, burning the air and shaking the entire avenue. The asphalt shattered under the unbearable pressure. Concrete and debris blasted into the air through clouds of smoke and dust. Twisted cars lay abandoned among the wreckage while, at the center of the explosion, Frieza's muscular silhouette and razor-sharp claws appeared faintly through the towering beam of light. Savage and tragic at once, like a monster being punished by the gods themselves. Then came the aftermath. Frieza lowered his head, breathing heavily, his body tense, as though he had just emerged from a world-ending war. His long tail curved behind him, with the grace and menace of a predator savoring victory. Around him, the streets were shattered. Broken concrete and rubble covered the ground, while columns of smoke spiraled into the cold gray air, obscuring the city beyond as though the district had survived a catastrophic explosion. A crushed car abandoned at the roadside deepened the post-apocalyptic atmosphere. Dim lighting and cold color tones framed Frieza as the ultimate villain, a being who had just unleashed overwhelming power. Dust drifted through the air, fragments of stone clattered across the ruined street. Frieza remained completely unharmed by Piccolo's attack. His cold white skin was covered in terrifying pale purple veins while his glowing red eyes burned like embers in the darkness. A twisted smile revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth, creating the expression of a villain intoxicated by absolute power and hungry to destroy everything before him. Is that truly all you've got? Frieza threw his head back and laughed madly, his voice echoing like the roar of a demon. His pale face twisted in victorious ecstasy, while veins pulsed beneath his cold skin. Sharp teeth spread wide within his insane laughter, radiating pure terror and dominance. Piccolo's eyes burned with fury, his teeth clenched in rage. Veins bulged across his face beneath his distinctive curved antennae. His massive white cape whipped violently in the wind. Cold sunlight reflected across his green skin and worn fabric, revealing every muscle, every wrinkle, every ounce of tension on the face of a warrior preparing for the final battle. Far behind him, pillars of smoke rose between the skyscrapers, creating a suffocating post-apocalyptic atmosphere, as though the entire city stood on the edge of collapse. Tension saturated every detail, transforming the moment into an epic confrontation before the coming storm of destruction. Beneath the blue sky of the modern city, the colossal bridge was suddenly torn apart by a catastrophic explosion powerful enough to resemble the end of the world. A massive orange fireball erupted in midair, consuming the structure in oceans of flame and spiraling black smoke. Giant steel fragments were hurled in every direction, spinning through the air like shattered warships destroyed in a great flood. Towering columns of white water exploded upward from the river below, as though the shockwave had pierced both bridge and water alike. Metal debris, cables, and concrete rained endlessly into the cold blue river while the remaining structure trembled on the verge of total collapse. Shockwaves, flying sparks, and expanding clouds of black smoke overwhelmed the sky. Beyond the catastrophe, the city skyline stood in haunting contrast, skyscrapers still looming silently while destruction consumed everything below. The entire city was descending into chaos because of a battle beyond human imagination. I've played with you long enough. Frieza stood tall like the final ruler of the battlefield. His pale white and purple body reflected the crimson light erupting from his fingertip, an energy sphere that looked ready to tear reality itself apart. His burning red eyes and twisted smile radiated unbearable tension. Smoke drifted between the ruined skyscrapers behind him, cold gray tones clashing violently against the blazing red energy in the foreground. Frieza appeared overwhelming and terrifying. Red lightning twisted around his hand with violent motion while the glow reflected across his muscular body, making him appear both surreal and deeply threatening. The central avenue had become nothing but endless dust and ruins. Between smoke-covered skyscrapers, Frieza walked slowly like a god of destruction descending upon the earth. His cold white body and glossy purple armor gleamed beneath the dim stormlight. Every step sent dust rising from the cracked pavement. His long tail swept silently behind him like the final punctuation mark on humanity's last hope. Above his raised fingertip, a crimson energy sphere spiraled violently, glowing like the core of a dying star. Red light reflected across his sinister smile and burning eyes, radiating absolute cruelty, calm, effortless, yet powerful enough to flatten the entire city with a single motion. Black smoke smoldered from burning wreckage at the street corners, while the world itself seemed drowned in ash-gray tones and icy light. In the heart of a city buried beneath dust, smoke, and the suffocating silence left behind by chaos, future trunks descended onto the shattered roadway with a landing so powerful the asphalt exploded apart, chunks of concrete blasting into the air. The young warrior with striking silver-purple hair crouched low in a combat stance, one hand pressed against the cracked ground while the other tightened into a fist, ready to launch into battle at any second. The massive sword strapped across his back rose above his shoulder like a silent warning. His blue denim jacket was coated in dust. His cold, sharpened gaze locked forward, filled with determination and rage buried beneath invisible loss. White smoke curled along both sides of the street while towering skyscrapers faded into the pale frozen light behind him. Fragments of stone hovered in midair, as if the force that had struck the ground moments ago was still shaking reality itself. It was the moment when fragile hope began to rise from the ashes of a dying world. "Sorry I'm late," Future Trunks said. His face tightened with fury on the edge of a life-or-death battle. Future Trunks clenched his jaw so hard, the veins and tension lines across his forehead stood out beneath the cold light, creating an almost suffocating pressure. His sharp blue eyes locked onto the target ahead with relentless hatred and determination pushed to their absolute limit. A wandering warrior. The sword resting behind his shoulder felt like a silent threat. A reminder that violence could erupt at any moment. The air trembled with violent energy, as though 1 second later Trunks would hurl himself directly into the battle that would decide his fate. It felt as if an explosion of power had detonated in that very instant. White dust spiraled violently through the air. Future Trunks stood ready for combat, legs lowered, fists clenched with murderous intent. His blue denim jacket fluttered lightly in the violent wind. The skyscrapers surrounding the road made everything feel small and suffocating, while thick smoke swallowed the background. Frieza. Every step he took across the rubble-covered street carried the weight of inevitable doom. Above his raised fingertip, a blazing sphere of purple energy twisted violently, radiating a brilliant light that stained the surrounding air violet. Bolts of energy cracked outward like they were tearing through the smoke hanging over the ruined city, signaling an attack powerful enough to erase everything still standing. The purple glow reflected across Frieza's muscles and emotionless face, creating the terrifying beauty of a being whose power surpassed human limits. From Frieza's fingertip, a colossal wave of violet energy ripped through the air in the center of the devastated city, surging forward like the wrath of a god of destruction. The white-purple light erupted so violently it swallowed the entire frame, drowning the world in a deadly flash. Arcs of electricity writhed around the blast like fractures splitting reality apart. At the center of the blinding explosion stood Frieza, smiling with cold cruelty. His glowing eyes pierced through the dust and destruction as though leveling an entire city was nothing more than entertainment. His pale gray body reflected the burning violet light, making him appear like an entity beyond all human law and understanding. Trunks lunged forward, nearly dropping to one knee, gripping his sword as if pouring every ounce of his will into one final counterattack. His body leaned low against the pavement, while his denim jacket whipped violently through the tearing wind, creating a sense of speed and desperation at the same time. Trunks dodged the attack. The blazing violet beam tore through the air like living lightning, bending savagely between the skyscrapers. Trails of energy stretched behind it, leaving flickering plasma and purple reflections across the frozen streets of the abandoned city. Then the collision exploded in midair. A gigantic fireball erupted, blasting tons of concrete, glass, and metal across the avenue. Debris spiraled through black smoke as an entire building was ripped apart by supernatural force. You still want to play around in a battle like this? Android 18's face tightened with fury, her blue eyes burning with fierce defiance, while her teeth clenched as if she were screaming against the apocalypse itself. Frieza's crimson eyes glowed like burning coals in darkness, filled with cruelty and twisted delight. His mouth stretched open in savage laughter, revealing sharp predator-like fangs. The sound echoed through the smoke-covered skyscrapers like a declaration of destruction about to descend upon humanity. The ruined city behind him blurred beneath dust and wreckage, overwhelming, unstoppable. "You will never destroy this future," Future Trunks said. Future Trunks charged forward like a storm about to erupt. His silver-purple hair whipped wildly in the wind, his icy eyes locked onto the enemy ahead, while his face twisted with burning rage pushed beyond its limit. His teeth ground together, veins rising along his neck as though the energy inside him had reached its breaking point. Hatred and determination filled his eyes, as if the world itself had disappeared, leaving only the explosion of emotion in that single instant. When rage was no longer an emotion, but a weapon. Frieza stood motionless among the ruins, cold as death itself. His glowing red eyes burned beneath tightly furrowed brows, staring through the gray ash-filled haze with restrained fury and overwhelming power. His face twisted under extreme rage, teeth grinding so hard his entire expression trembled as though he were barely containing the catastrophic energy about to erupt from within him. His crimson eyes glowed through the cold gray mist like embers from hell burning in darkness. That stare carried more than anger, it radiated absolute cruelty, as though everything before him would be erased in the next moment. "Monkeys are nothing but a disease," Frieza said. From inside the violently shaking cockpit of a helicopter soaring through the evening sky, the city looked like an apocalyptic war zone. Skyscrapers burned fiercely as towering pillars of fire consumed entire upper floors amid thunderous explosions, while thick black smoke rolled upward and swallowed the horizon. At the center of the chaos, a massive tower collapsed into a sea of flames. The blazing orange inferno reflected across the glass surfaces of nearby buildings, casting a horrifying glow over the city. Far in the distance, the horizon faded beneath pale golden dusk stained by the suffocating blackness of war smoke. A news helicopter flew dangerously close to the burning district, hovering beside the devastation as if trying to capture the city's final moments of chaos. Inside the cockpit, glowing control panels flickered beside emergency broadcast monitors. Under the cold blue lighting of a television studio, the female news anchor appeared on screen with a tense expression and an urgent voice, as though delivering a report capable of shaking the entire world. Her dark tailored suit and perfectly styled blonde hair projected flawless professionalism, yet behind her, the city was collapsing into chaos. The words, "Breaking News," blazed across the giant screen, in violent red and blue tones like a global alarm signal. Massive clouds of black smoke spiraled upward from shattered streets, where explosions still smoldered within the concrete maze of the city. The exact moment the anchor began speaking was captured on screen, eyes intensely focused, lips parting mid-emergency broadcast. her face maintaining professional composure even while the atmosphere behind her screamed of the end of the world. Latest reports confirm that New York City is under attack by an unidentified entity, not human, the reporter declared. A narrow alleyway disappeared beneath heavy fog, cold light washing over cracked concrete walls and overflowing trash bins lining both sides. At the center of the frame, the silhouette of a sharp-haired warrior slowly emerged through the white smoke as though stepping out from another dimension. His body appeared only as a dark silhouette, radiating loneliness and overwhelming power. Bleak. Silent. Tense. The dense mist concealed the far end of the alley, making the scene feel mysterious, as if danger itself waited ahead. Soft diffused light reflected off the wet pavement and scattered debris, yet his calm stride and razor-sharp hair carried the presence of a superhuman entering the battlefield. "Move aside, insect," Vegeta said. The warrior's face burned with intensity beneath his towering black hair. His cold eyes glowed with fury and battle lust. Veins bulged across his forehead, his skin covered in dirt and small cuts. His clenched teeth and silent growl created the sense of pressure and explosive power seconds away from detonation. His dark blue battle armor clung tightly to his body, its golden accents scarred and damaged. Behind him, enormous pillars of smoke spiraled above the ruined city, lit by faint orange fire like the dying remains of a war that had just ended. Amid the smoke-filled city and towering concrete structures, Vegeta descended from the sky like wrath incarnate, his sharply raised hair, cold eyes, and murderous aura cut through the destruction. On both sides, crimson explosions tore through the dense gray haze while smoke rolled upward in massive clouds over the city. The pale silver light created an atmosphere of chaos, violence, and unstoppable destructive energy. In the center of the devastated city buried beneath gray dust and shattered concrete, Vegeta struck the ground like a living meteor. Cold skyscrapers surrounded him while the road ahead had become a battlefield littered with broken steel, rubble, and drifting smoke. Vegeta stood at the center, arms spread wide to stabilize himself after the impact. His blue armor contrasted against the ash-gray world around him while his lowered gaze radiated cold pride and terrifying danger. The dusty haze in the distance made the frame feel suffocatingly heavy, while twisted steel beams along the streets resembled the bones of a dead monster left behind after battle. Within the ruined city, blanketed in smoke and ash, Vegeta stood like the final king of the apocalypse battlefield. In the middle of the destroyed avenue, where shattered concrete and bent steel jutted upward like the spine of a fallen beast, he crossed his arms in silence, cold, motionless, yet overwhelmingly oppressive. His posture stood perfectly straight, his eyes sharp as blades beneath towering hair. It felt as though he alone possessed the power to end everything. "Hello, Prince," Frieza said. Frieza stood cold and motionless like the embodiment of destruction itself. His glowing red eyes pierced through the gray haze, staring at the world as though passing judgment upon it. Amid streets buried beneath ash and shattered concrete, the two warriors faced one another in an atmosphere so heavy with tension it felt like the calm before a world-ending storm. Vegeta roared in fury, as though unleashing every ounce of power restrained within him. His towering hair whipped violently, his face twisted in rage, his eyes blazing with the will to fight while his scream tore through the suffocating atmosphere of the collapsing city. His fists clenched tightly, muscles rigid beneath the force of his roar, as though he were shattering the limits of his own strength. Blue-white lightning exploded wildly around him, ripping through the air and illuminating the darkened sky with blinding radiance. The ground beneath his feet trembled and shattered apart. Chunks of stone and debris blasted upward from the overwhelming energy flooding through the streets. His warrior armor reflected the cold electric glow surrounding him, making him resemble a god of war awakened at the end of the world. Behind him, skyscrapers disappeared beneath gray smoke and blazing white light, creating a sense of overwhelming intensity. The final moment before a power capable of changing the fate of the entire world was fully unleashed. Vegeta stood at the center of a colossal energy eruption. Blue-white aura exploded from his body, spiraling violently like supernatural flames devouring the entire street. His roar echoed through the ash-filled sky, his face strained beneath power beyond human limits, while his eyes burned with unbreakable fighting spirit. The ground beneath him was crushed into massive fractures. Enormous slabs of concrete and stone floated into the air under the pressure of the energy being released. Smoke and dust spiraled around his body in violent waves, as though space itself were warping beneath the sheer magnitude of his power. His battle armor reflected the electric blue light, making him look like a god of war reborn in the middle of the apocalypse. On both sides of the street, towering skyscrapers disappeared into a haze of gray smoke and collapsing walls as chunks of concrete and debris exploded through the air. Vegeta dropped into a fighting stance, emerald blue energy erupting around his body in violent surges of electric light. Furious bolts of lightning twisted like dragons made of pure energy, tearing across the atmosphere and shaking the entire post-apocalyptic battlefield. His face contorted in a furious roar, eyes burning with the resolve of a warrior prepared to destroy every final limit standing before him. The white and blue armor reflected the blinding electrical glow, making his figure stand out against the ash-gray ruins of the shattered city. One arm thrust forward, poised to unleash an attack carrying catastrophic force, while the ground beneath him still trembled from the massive pressure wave that had just erupted. Vegeta screamed, pouring every ounce of power into the gigantic sphere of blue electrical energy forming in his left hand. Plasma lightning exploded wildly around the orb, casting an intense cyan glow across his armor and the devastated streets below. The colossal blue energy sphere launched forward like the heart of an awakening apocalypse. It blazed violently, wrapped in spiraling white-blue currents of electricity, as though the space around it were being ripped apart by power beyond control. Buildings lining the avenue shattered apart, concrete and twisted steel ripped into the air as if pulled toward the epicenter. Dust swallowed the cityscape while the cold blue light of the sphere reflected off every fragment of rubble, transforming the street into pure chaos. The energy mass continued, swelling larger, carrying the terrifying sensation that it was about to consume everything ahead of it. Lightning burst outward like living branches of thunder while streaks of light pierced through the clouds of dust. The strike hit its target. The energy sphere detonated. A colossal blast of blue-white light erupted through the ruined street, consuming the entire frame in a brilliance so intense it felt capable of tearing through the screen itself. The shockwave exploded outward violently, dragging dust, metal, and shattered concrete into the air. Blue-white lightning intertwined around the center of the explosion like thousands of screaming thunderbolts tearing across the sky. The rows of buildings on both sides faded behind the overwhelming radiance, making it feel as though the entire city were being crushed by unimaginable force. A gigantic pillar of energy erupted like the wrath of a god. A mushroom cloud twisted across the sky, dense and black, torn apart by blazing blue electrical lightning that made the atmosphere itself appear fractured. At the heart of the explosion, the energy beam shot upward from the earth into the heavens like an apocalyptic judgment. Smoke and debris blasted across the avenue while ghostly blue light reflected against the glass windows of skyscrapers, transforming the modern city into a battlefield at the end of the world. Yet in the middle of that sprawling metropolis, a catastrophic explosion shattered all order. A fireball erupted violently, swallowing the streets below in blinding white-orange light. Layers of black smoke rolled outward like living creatures, swelling between the skyscrapers into a spreading cloud of death. From above, the explosion looked like the beating heart of the apocalypse awakening in the center of the city. Flames reflected across the glass towers, turning the entire landscape into a haunting portrait of chaos. Roads vanished beneath waves of dust and shockwaves, while the buildings surrounding the blast stood like helpless witnesses before a force beyond human control. Against the silver-gray sky of late afternoon, an enormous pillar of smoke climbed into the heavens. The dense mushroom cloud churned violently, blotting out the sunlight and turning the atmosphere heavy and suffocating. Below, the skyscrapers looked pitifully small before the destructive force unfolding around them. Dust spread through the avenues like an invisible tsunami, devouring sound and life alike. Dim light pierced through layers of smoke, casting cold rays across the devastation. "We did it," Vegeta said. Vegeta stood motionless amid the ruins. Sweat streamed down his tense face, his widened eyes filled with shock and determination, as though he had just witnessed a power beyond mortal limits. Gray smoke coiled upward behind him, turning the street into a suffocating post-apocalyptic war zone. Broken slabs of concrete littered the ground at his feet while the cold cinematic lighting gave the scene a grim and tragic realism. In the middle of the dust-covered avenue and the echoes of destruction, Future Trunks stood frozen as if dragged into the center of the apocalypse itself. His silver-purple hair hung over eyes widened in disbelief, reflecting the chaos erupting around him. His breathing was sharp and uneven, lips slightly parted, the face of a man witnessing the impossible. His blue denim jacket, covered in ash, trembled in the scorching wind as shattered concrete scattered through the air. Behind him, towering buildings faded into swirling gray smoke, creating the suffocating atmosphere of a collapsing city. Pale golden light cut through the dust, giving the frame a raw and terrifying realism. "What is that?" Trunks whispered in shock. His blue eyes widened with fury and despair, staring ahead like a warrior confronting the enemy, responsible for pushing the world to the brink of destruction. His scream seemed to tear through the smoke-filled atmosphere. Silver-purple hair clung to the sides of his sweat-covered face, reflecting the flames burning behind him. Sparks and debris rained through the sky like a storm of chaos over the dying city. His faded denim jacket was coated in dust and ash. Emerging from the smoke of the explosion, Frieza floated in the air like a god of destruction. His cold white body, accented by metallic purple armor-like plates, gleamed through the thick smoke. He hovered above the shattered street without touching the ground, as though gravity itself bowed before his overwhelming power. Massive columns of smoke spiraled behind him, swallowing skyscrapers beneath the gray shadow of war and annihilation. Broken concrete and twisted steel cables littered the streets below, creating a chilling post-apocalyptic landscape. Yet, amidst the chaos, Frieza remained terrifyingly calm, brushing dust from his chest with one hand, head slightly lowered, a faint smile of absolute contempt crossing his face. Cinematic lighting carved cold contrasts across his body, emphasizing every inhuman detail of his physique. The silence of the powerful was more terrifying than any explosion. Frieza's cold expression, mixed with quiet disdain, created a suffocating tension. Without raising his voice or making a single dramatic movement, his gaze alone was enough to make the devastation behind him feel insignificant and hopeless. "Child's play," Frieza said. His pale gray face resembled weathered ancient stone, rough and cracked, with jagged lines stretching beside his eyes that gave him a merciless appearance. His glowing crimson eyes burned through the darkness, sharp, arrogant, and terrifying, as though he were gazing down upon a world about to collapse beneath his feet. A crooked smile revealed dull white teeth, calm and horrifying, without the need for rage. "That's impossible," Vegeta muttered in horror. Natural light cut across his dirt and sweat-covered face, exposing every pore and scarred detail. His gray-blue pupils reflected the world ahead of him. Within those eyes lived shock, caution, and the realization that he had witnessed something beyond imagination. His eyelashes trembled faintly, the skin around his eyes marked by exhaustion, yet his stare remained razor-sharp. Reflected in his irises was the glowing silhouette of the destruction ahead, as though the entire world had shrunk into those eyes alone. "Don't tell me this is all you've got," Frieza said. Frieza's crimson eyes narrowed like blades, filled with icy contempt for everything around him. His twisted smile exposed crooked, sharpened teeth, creating an atmosphere thick with menace, not explosive rage, but the calm cruelty of someone who knew himself to be invincible. Smoke churned behind him like the remains of a battle already finished. On both sides, skyscrapers faded into gray mist, creating the depth of a cinematic post-apocalyptic world where the city itself seemed crushed beneath inhuman power. The character did not need to act, merely standing there was enough to make it feel as though catastrophe itself had arrived. This was the kind of frame reserved for the moment a villain fully reveals himself, when the audience realizes the real battle has only just begun. "No, impossible," Android 18 whispered. Android 18's blue eyes widened in terror as though she had witnessed something beyond comprehension. Tension tightened across her brow, lips parted, breathing rapid with fear. Cold light washed over her face as she realized the horrifying truth or stared directly at the doom rushing toward them. "Now it's my turn," Frieza said. His red eyes narrowed with murderous intent, while the crooked grin on his face carried the absolute confidence of someone holding life and death in his hands. One arm extended outward, finger pointing directly ahead. His cold white-gray body reflected the sinister violet glow of the energy sphere forming at his fingertip. Purple lightning spiraled violently around it, trembling with enough power to tear an entire city apart. One eye narrowed slightly while the corner of his mouth curled into a cruel smile, the expression of someone who knew he stood far above every opponent. The light from the growing sphere illuminated his face and chest. The tension became suffocating before the coming destruction. The villain was preparing to unleash the decisive strike while the world itself had only seconds left before turning to ash. Frieza rose higher into the air, floating with terrifying calm, a perfect body sculpted from cold porcelain and living metal, reflecting the dying light of the collapsing city. Within his palm, a blazing sphere of violet energy churned like a dying star on the verge of detonation. Purple lightning stretched across the frame, lashing ruined skyscrapers like the whips of a god of destruction while the air trembled beneath the crushing pressure. The light from the sphere painted his face in sinister purple, highlighting his glowing crimson eyes as he looked down upon the world with absolute indifference. Dust floated through the shattered cityscape while rubble covered the cracked streets below. Silence and fear spread everywhere in anticipation of the destruction about to descend. A colossal storm of energy erupted. Frieza's body vanished within a blazing violet-white aura that exploded outward like a supernova. A gigantic beam of pink-purple energy blasted forward, tearing through the dust while the entire world trembled as though the ground itself were about to split apart. The light from the impact flooded the avenue in eerie shades of violet, reflecting against ruined walls and swirling dust clouds. The energy beam struck Vegeta directly. His body was swallowed by blinding violet-white light so intense it nearly burned every surrounding detail into shadow. Purple lightning ripped through the air like cracks in reality itself. Dust spiraled across the shattered pavement while the glow of the energy reflected across the buildings lining the street, creating a suffocating atmosphere of total apocalypse. Vegeta was blasted off the ground by the devastating impact. His body spun uncontrollably through the air, legs thrown upward while his arms instinctively tried to shield himself in desperation. Behind him, white smoke and lingering violet light still hung in the air like the scar of an explosion that had torn through the entire avenue. Chunks of rubble and concrete littered the cracked street while skyscrapers faded behind dense clouds of dust. Vegeta's body slammed violently into the pavement, triggering an explosion of debris that erupted upward like a volcanic blast. His legs still jutted upward through the thick cloud of smoke while shattered concrete and rubble scattered in every direction. The street itself appeared crushed beneath force beyond imagination, leaving only devastation in the center of the ruined avenue. On both sides, rows of skyscrapers stood beneath the cold, fading light of a bleak afternoon. Dust and smoke consumed the atmosphere. Frieza smiled, a frozen expression of madness. His narrow crimson eyes gleamed with cruelty, while his sharpened teeth spread wide, as though he were savoring the chaos around him. Behind him, massive columns of dust rose from the ruined city, giving the frame the feeling of a battle that had torn the entire world apart. Frieza stood cold and towering like the embodiment of catastrophe itself. The manic smile was gone, his face now frozen in absolute rage, crimson eyes burning like dying embers through the gray haze of a city on the verge of collapse. Amid the ruins of a shattered metropolis buried beneath smoke, dust, and broken concrete, a young warrior hovered in midair like the manifestation of overwhelming power. Gohan wore a torn purple gi ripped open in several places, muscles tensed beneath battered fabric, his black hair spiking upward violently as though raw energy were erupting from within him. His sharp gaze locked straight ahead, carrying the fury and determination of a fighter who had survived a battle against death itself. His arms hung low at his sides, yet the sheer force of his levitating stance made it feel as though he controlled the entire space around him. Beneath him, the ground split apart, chunks of stone and shattered pavement ripped upward by the pressure of his immense power. Thick spirals of smoke and dust twisted around his body, as if invisible waves of energy were spreading outward and transforming the entire street into a devastated battlefield. The atmosphere trembled with the tension of a moment just before a world-ending clash. Gohan descended to the ground in a display of overwhelming force. The street cracked beneath the impact of his landing, shards of concrete and debris exploding around his feet, while thick columns of smoke curled upward between the ruined skyscrapers behind him. His muscles stood out beneath the cold, dim light of the gray sky, giving the impression of power compressed to its absolute limit. One hand slammed against the ground to steady himself after the violent impact, while the other clenched tightly into a fist, ready for the next counterattack. His piercing eyes stared forward, filled with determination and a simmering rage that refused to yield. His black hair stood wildly upright, his dirt-streaked face and heavy breathing making him look like the final warrior standing at the end of the world. Thick dust and smoke surrounded him. The cold ash-gray palette, mixed with dim lighting and chaotic clouds of flying debris, created an atmosphere of suffocating cinematic intensity. Sweat mixed with dirt covered his face and hardened shoulders, reflecting the dull, icy light pouring down from the gray sky above. Scratches and grime across his skin made him appear raw, grounded, and painfully real, like a warrior torn straight from a post-apocalyptic epic. His black hair whipped violently in the wind and pressure waves of his own energy, while his flexed arms and tightened fists revealed a body on the verge of eruption. His eyes held more than anger, they carried an unbreakable instinct to survive, the gaze of someone who had surpassed his own limits and still refused to fall. "Sorry, I'm late, my father's here too," Gohan said. His shredded purple gi clung tightly to his hardened frame, every torn edge fluttering in the scorching, chaotic air. His lips parted slightly as he fought to steady his heavy breathing after battle. Yet his stare remained unwavering, cold, and suffocatingly intense, the eyes of someone who had never once considered giving up. Inside a modern broadcast studio drenched in cold lighting and towering LED screens, a female reporter stood at the center of an atmosphere filled with urgency, delivering live coverage of the catastrophe that had just unfolded. She wore a dark red suit, gripping a microphone toward the camera, her expression professional but severe, as though she were delivering information capable of shaking the entire world. Behind her, a massive news screen displayed Manhattan engulfed in smoke and flames, skyscrapers heavily damaged and collapsing. The glowing red words, "Breaking News," blazed beneath the footage alongside the Spanish headline, "En vivo, destruction in Manhattan," making the scene feel like a live broadcast during the final hours of humanity. White smoke rose from the destroyed city blocks on screen, filling the studio with an overwhelming sense of chaos and tension. A global broadcast where the entire world watched every second of the unfolding crisis. The reporter maintained a calm professional demeanor, but traces of fear still lingered in her eyes at the sheer scale of the disaster behind her. "We are receiving reports that Manhattan is under attack by unidentified forces. We will bring you more information as soon as it becomes available," the reporter said. From a bird's-eye view, the enormous city stretched beneath the cold light of sunset, skyscrapers crowding together like an endless forest of steel beside the mist-covered river. Yet amid that thriving urban landscape, disaster had erupted like an apocalyptic nightmare. At the center, a towering skyscraper had been torn open from the top down, its twisted steel frame exposed like the charred skeleton of a colossal beast. Massive columns of white smoke spiraled violently upward while orange flames burned deep within the wreckage. Dust and ash spread across the streets below, making the entire city feel as though it were holding its breath after the destruction. Cinematic lighting washed over the scene in cold blue tones mixed with the pale gold of late afternoon. In the distance, the vast green park remained eerily peaceful, as though the world had not yet realized the catastrophe swallowing the heart of the city. Android 18 stood frozen among the ruins of what had once been a bustling metropolis, facing something beyond a nightmare. Towering buildings loomed on both sides of the street, their shattered windows and scarred facades, bearing the marks of annihilation. Across the ruined avenue, Frieza floated in midair. His arms were crossed arrogantly, his invisible gaze radiating absolute dominance, like a god of war descending upon humanity. The long tail curling behind him made his silhouette even more terrifying and inhuman. The streets were cracked apart, the vehicles gone, nothing remained but endless wreckage stretching across the city like the remains of a catastrophic war. Smoke and ash clouded the air in cold gray tones, creating a suffocating atmosphere of tension. "Now you'll pay for everything," Android 18 said. "You've made me angry," Frieza replied. Frieza's glowing red eyes burned through the haze behind him. That stare carried pure wrath and murderous intent, as though within the next heartbeat the entire city behind him would be crushed into ash. His clenched teeth and face twisted by rage radiated the terrifying presence of an absolute tyrant. In the middle of a ruined boulevard covered in ash and shattered concrete, two figures stood facing one another in a heavy silence, like the final calm before humanity's last storm. The muscles across Frieza's back stood sharply defined beneath the cold light, making him appear less like a living being and more like a perfect weapon of war created solely to conquer and destroy. His long tail hanging low behind him only made his stance more intimidating and overwhelming. Facing him stood Android 18, small against the cracked streets and mountains of debris. Despite her fragile appearance, her eyes remained fixed on her enemy without a single step backward. Frieza lunged toward Android 18 with horrifying speed, his body blurring through the air. His tail sliced across the frame like the scythe of death, leaving the feeling that the fabric of space itself had been torn apart by supernatural force. A colossal energy explosion erupted in the middle of the ruined street like the arrival of the apocalypse itself. Blinding white gold light consumed everything so completely that the skyscrapers on both sides appeared only as distorted shadows within the sea of fire and dust. The ground shattered and trembled beneath the pressure of the blast, chunks of concrete and twisted metal thrown skyward as though gravity itself had ceased to exist. Purple and orange streams of energy spiraled around the center of the explosion like a gateway to annihilation opening in the heart of the city. The air became thick with burning dust and incandescent light, as though the power unleashed had surpassed all human limits. For one frozen moment amid the chaos, nothing remained except the invisible roar of energy and the terrifying feeling that the entire city could vanish within seconds. Android 18's body was hurled violently into the air like a helpless toy before the devastating force of the explosion. The instant froze within the cold gray haze of the ruined city, creating the sensation that time itself had stopped after the horrific impact. Gohan screamed. His silver-gray hair stood violently upright as if electrified, his face twisted to its limit, eyes clenched shut as his roar tore through the air itself. Around him, enormous slabs of concrete were ripped into the sky while dust spiraled upward like tidal waves. The buildings lining the avenue leaned within the gray smoke, making it feel as though the entire city were collapsing beneath an invisible force that had finally awakened. Cold light reflected off sweat-drenched skin, emphasizing every vein across his neck and shoulders as though his body were pushing far beyond human limits. The atmosphere felt violent, suffocating, and charged with supernatural energy. At the center of the ruined city, where skyscrapers had become nothing more than fractured skeletons beneath a sky drowned in dust, Android 18 lay motionless atop the wreckage like the final memory of a dead world. Her body was buried among shattered concrete, twisted steel, and massive slabs of debris that had collapsed after the devastating shockwave. Her blonde hair was coated in dust, her face pale, her eyes barely closed, as though every last ounce of strength had been drained from her after a hopeless battle. Her striped shirt, faded denim jacket, and ash-covered boots stood out against the cold apocalyptic landscape. There were no voices left, no signs of life, only the sound of wind screaming through broken window frames and dust drifting endlessly through the gray air, as though the entire city had been crushed by an unstoppable supernatural force. Pale cold light covered the scene, bleak and brutal yet deeply emotional. In the middle of a destroyed street, buried beneath smoke and rubble, Trunks stood consumed by absolute fury. His face twisted with rage, eyes wide, veins bulging along his neck, his scream tearing through the suffocating atmosphere around him. Behind him stretched the remains of a city destroyed by catastrophe, twisted steel frames, endless debris, and white smoke rising between cold skyscrapers. The cold blue-gray palette amplified the hopelessness and chaos, while the dim sky made the scene feel even heavier. "You're going to pay for this," Trunks shouted in rage. His face tightened with anger and grief. Teeth clenched, eyes sharpened with murderous focus, he looked as though he were pouring every ounce of willpower into the instant before unleashing his strength. The massive city disappeared beneath the darkness of an enormous storm swallowing the horizon. Black clouds churned like a living creature, thick and oppressive, hanging over the sky with terrifying pressure. In the distance, walls of rain poured down in massive gray sheets, hiding everything beyond the city. A flash of lightning erupted along the horizon, illuminating the cold, apocalyptic landscape for a single instant. Between the skyscrapers, a massive scar of destruction stretched through the center of the city, like the aftermath of an unimaginable war. Collapsed rooftops and shattered concrete revealed a place struck by an attack beyond human comprehension. Amid the sea of wreckage and swirling smoke, Frieza stood alone at the center of the crater, staring upward at the sky with eyes filled with fury and absolute power. His long tail curved like a whip through the gray haze while his pale white body and glowing purple armor-like markings stood out against the cold ash-covered landscape. Broken concrete, twisted steel, and thick dust surrounded him. The dark lighting created a suffocating atmosphere, like the final moment before a catastrophic outburst of rage. Frieza's crimson eyes glowed beneath the storm-filled sky. His stare was emotionless yet terrifyingly cold, like a being born only to deliver death itself. The red light reflected across his pale face, giving him a ghostly and deeply menacing appearance. Frieza stood towering like the absolute ruler of destruction. Cold blue-gray light washed across his sharply defined muscles, his face tightened with cold fury as he sensed an overwhelming pressure approaching, a colossal power drawing near. Massive chunks of concrete and twisted steel floated into the air, lifted by an invisible force. The ground split apart while waves of ash and dust rolled violently through the ruined streets. The buildings on both sides had become nothing more than hollow concrete corpses drowning within the cold haze. Above, the sky was suffocated by blue-gray storm clouds heavy enough to crush the entire city beneath them. Rocks hovered motionless in the air, as though a godlike entity had bent the laws of physics themselves. The city, reality itself, seemed to be breaking apart beneath a power too immense to control. Hundreds of massive slabs of rock and concrete were ripped violently from the ground, hurtling skyward through the suffocating black storm as if gravity itself had been shattered. Smaller fragments spiraled through the air in frantic, chaotic motion, turning the atmosphere into something suffocating and unreal. Beyond the curtain of dust, the blue-gray sky was torn apart by cold flashes of light bursting through layers of storm clouds. The world itself seemed warped and trembling, the moment of being beyond human comprehension unleashed enough power to bend both space and physics. Amid the sea of shattered concrete and dense smoke, a colossal pillar of white light crashed straight down from the heavens, so blinding it seemed capable of tearing the darkness apart. The beam struck the ruined heart of the city like an apocalyptic blade of light. Broken slabs of concrete lay scattered across the battlefield while ash and gray smoke were blasted from the ground by the overwhelming pressure of the impact. Cold white light reflected across every fragment of rubble, creating a violent contrast between darkness and pure energy. On both sides, towering buildings stood silent and lifeless, nothing remained except light, ash, and the suffocating feeling of annihilation consuming everything. That violent energy ripped through the atmosphere, hurling debris and ash skyward as though gravity had ceased to exist entirely. Black smoke surged between the scorched skyscrapers, casting the city into a freezing, death-like atmosphere. Massive chunks of concrete hovered around the center of the explosion, as if drawn towards some supernatural force beyond human understanding. At the center stood a lone figure with wild, upward-spiked hair, illuminated by a blazing vertical pillar of white light descending from the sky. Violent energy radiated outward from him, lifting concrete and rubble into the air as though pulled by an unseen godlike force. Dust and ash spread thick through the battlefield, drowning everything in chaos and gloom. Massive debris spiraled around him, emphasizing overwhelming power, a moment where even space itself seemed forced to yield before that energy. Destruction. Unimaginable power. And at the center of it all, a single warrior commanding the entire storm, creating a visual spectacle both majestic and terrifying. A solitary silhouette stepped forward from the heart of the blazing white light, like a gate descending from the heavens. The cold, wet ground reflected the glow behind him, making every step feel heavy with authority, as though the entire world had fallen silent before his arrival. The figure finally emerged. It was Goku, standing amidst the dust and ruins, his eyes sharp as steel and locked onto the enemy ahead. His wild black hair rose like dark flames against the smoke-choked gray sky of the devastated city. Behind him lay shattered concrete, twisted steel, and waves of dust rolling like the lingering echoes of a catastrophic battle. No screams, no wasted movement. Only a silence stretched tight before the coming storm of energy. The lighting was cold, dark, and oppressive, carving every detail across Goku's face with brutal clarity, dust clinging to his skin, brows tightly furrowed, jaw clenched hard, and eyes burning with unshakable resolve. This was the portrait of a warrior who had walked through destruction itself and now stood ready to confront destiny. Frieza, Goku said. Frieza's pale, purple skin bulged with twisted veins, the living embodiment of pure destruction. His crimson eyes, burned with murderous intent, locked onto his target with merciless coldness. His teeth ground together beneath a silent growl, as though the rage inside him was moments away from erupting into an unstoppable nightmare. Every wrinkle in his face and every tension in his skin radiated inhuman power, the kind of force capable of crushing worlds through sheer will alone. Behind him, shattered concrete and twisted steel vanished into thick clouds of dust. The cold purple tones and grim lighting gave the entire scene a terrifying presence. Goku, Frieza said. Frieza threw back his head and roared like a monster finally freed from its last chain. His mouth stretched wide in fury, revealing razor-sharp teeth and a scream that felt powerful enough to tear space itself apart. His glowing red eyes blazed with pure rage, reflecting the icy bloodlust of a creature born solely for destruction. Purple veins pulsed violently beneath his pale skin, as though the energy inside him had surpassed all control. Around him, jagged streams of violet lightning erupted through the gray smoke, transforming the battlefield into a terrifying supernatural storm. It was the moment of being reached the absolute peak of both power and fury. Purple energy engulfed his body like the flames of hell itself, making the air tremble as everything around him threatened to collapse beneath the unbearable pressure. His face twisted with wrath, the expression of a nearly unstoppable villain, the living incarnation of absolute destruction before the end of the world. Goku stood silently atop the ruins. Above him, enormous black storm clouds churned violently, spiraling like a vortex consuming the world itself. Smoke rose endlessly from collapsed buildings, covering the horizon in suffocating gray haze and death. Amid the chaos, Goku stood immovable. His stance remained firm as steel, both fists clenched tightly at his sides. His gaze lowered in silence, as though carrying the weight of the entire battle upon his shoulders. This was the stillness after the storm, the moment a warrior stands among the ashes, preparing for the final battle of destiny. Goku lowered his center of gravity and entered a fighting stance like a storm about to erupt. One fist tightened at his side, while the other arm extended forward, fingers curled menacingly. Dust swirled violently around him as small fragments of earth and stone lifted into the air under the invisible pressure of awakening energy. His orange gi was torn and covered in ash. Goku's eyes sharpened like blades, completely focused on the enemy ahead. Nothing remained except pure combat instinct and indomitable will. Muscles tightened beneath dust-covered skin, revealing that he was preparing to unleash a strike powerful enough to decide the entire battle. "You will not destroy this city," Goku said. Every breath carried the scent of ash and destruction. Scratches remained across his face, sweat mixing with dirt as it ran down his tense features, yet his eyes still burned fiercely, cold, focused, and unwavering. His black hair rose like flames against the darkened sky, one hand extended forward with claw-like fingers, signaling the moment before a decisive attack. Every muscle along his arms and neck tightened beneath torn fabric, showing the immense power compressed within his body. An endless sea of broken concrete stretched across the battlefield, where skyscrapers once stood proudly and now remained only as ashes and twisted steel. Smoke billowed from every direction, smothering the world in the cold gray color of destruction. At the center of the massive crater stood the alien warrior motionless, like a god of war emerging from hell itself. His pale purple body contrasted against the lifeless gray ruins. He did not need to move. He did not need to roar. Merely standing at the heart of the devastation was enough to reveal who had caused this catastrophe. Smoke continued rising around him like the lingering breath of a battlefield not yet cooled. Frieza stood atop the rubble. His muscular white and purple body towered above shattered concrete and pillars of smoke rising endlessly from the cracked earth. Behind him, the sky churned beneath violent black storm clouds, drowning the entire scene in cold, death-like light. Dust and ash drifted weightlessly around him as though trapped within an invisible energy field. His villainous face twisted with fury, crimson eyes glowing with the killing intent of a predator ready to finish its final prey. His wide stance, lowered arms, and curved tail radiated menace. Frieza lowered himself into a predator's stance, like a beast preparing for the final killing blow. One foot pressed into fractured concrete, while both arms spread wide, clawed fingers extended with murderous intent, creating the feeling that within the next instant he would tear everything before him apart. Frieza exploded from the shattered rubble like a living nightmare rising from the ashes. His glowing red eyes pierced through the thick smoke, radiating primal fury and icy bloodlust. The instant he launched into the sky, his body became a blur of violent motion, overwhelming speed and monstrous power combined. Beneath him, bursts of light erupted from the ground, blasting stone and debris skyward like an energy detonation igniting beneath the battlefield. A colossal pillar of dust erupted into the sky like a volcano awakening within the ruined city. Earth, concrete, and twisted metal were ripped violently from the ground and hurled upward in an explosion of chaos and destruction. Gray-brown clouds spiraled violently while fragments of debris blasted outward like artillery fire. Beyond the dense dust storm, the sky remained drowned beneath cold blue-gray thunderclouds. Dim light pierced through the layers of cloud, creating an atmosphere heavy with apocalypse. Nothing remained except the raw violence of energy and power tearing reality apart. Amid black clouds twisting like the end of the world itself, Frieza became a blazing streak ripping through the heavens, soaring upward like a missile escaping the destruction below. The brilliant white-orange light around him blurred his form into the image of a warrior breaking free from the earth at inhuman speed. Below him, the massive dust column still churned violently, swallowing the battlefield beneath waves of debris and smoke. The black storm clouds themselves were split apart by the force of his energy, revealing a glowing rupture in the darkened sky. The moment a superhuman entity unleashed the entirety of its power. Goku held his ground, both feet anchored into the fractured earth, ready to face the storm racing toward him. Thick dust swirled around his body like a phantom vortex, as though invisible energy were awakening within him. His torn orange gi was covered in ash and battle scars, while his sharp eyes remained locked on the target with absolute focus. One fist tightened while the other rose into guard position. His black hair shifted violently beneath the raging winds. A faint blue aura began spreading around his body, creating ripples of energy that tore through the smoke at his feet. Goku clenched both fists tighter, muscles straining as though compressing immense power inside his body. Chunks of concrete trembled before ripping free from the ground, while spirals of dust erupted around him. Blue electrical light reflected across the ruins. Above him, the sky darkened beneath storm clouds, yet in the center of that darkness, the warrior's energy ignited like a new sun. Wind screamed, earth cracked apart, and the atmosphere itself warned that a world-ending battle was about to begin. Goku dropped to one knee amid oceans of dust and shattered concrete. In that brief moment of silence, his hands drew together before his chest, gathering a blazing sphere of blue energy bright enough to tear apart the surrounding gloom. The light from the energy illuminated his wounded face and torn gi. Stones beneath his feet trembled violently, while dust exploded outward in spiraling waves under the monstrous pressure radiating from his body. Both arms thrust skyward toward the storm-black heavens, unleashing a colossal blue-white pillar of energy into the sky, swallowing the battlefield in blinding light. Massive slabs of concrete and fragments of collapsed buildings were dragged upward beneath the unbearable pressure of the power surge. The earth shook violently while waves of smoke spiraled around him, as though the entire world itself had fallen to its knees before infinite power awakened. The gigantic blue-white beam tore through the blackened sky like the wrath of a god erupting from the earth. The blinding column of light surged upward from the center of the battlefield into the storm clouds above. Jagged streams of blue lightning coiled along the beam like thunder dragons twisting within the storm. Dust and debris exploded into the air, forming a chaotic vortex around the epicenter. Everything around it became insignificant before that overwhelming force. Amid the endless black clouds of an apocalyptic storm, Frieza hovered high above the battlefield. His muscular white and purple body appeared cold and terrifying, while his long tail curved through the air like a living blade waiting to deliver the final judgment upon the world below. Massive white bolts of lightning tore across the heavens, illuminating every abyss-like layer of black storm clouds. Far beneath him, the city stretched out small and fragile, buried beneath a haze of war, as though all of human civilization had become nothing more than a toy beneath the gaze of a supreme destroyer. His white and purple body reflected the violent flashes, every muscle tightened beneath the eerie violet glow. From the palm of his hand, a colossal sphere of purple energy erupted into existence, blazing like an artificial sun devouring the sky itself. White lightning ripped through space around it, weaving violently across the trembling orb as though the clouds themselves were being twisted and crushed by its unimaginable power. The wind screamed. Black clouds spiraled in chaos. Purple light drained everything in a deadly beauty, cold, merciless, and absolutely overwhelming, as if one more motion of his hand could erase the entire city below into nothingness. Frieza hurled the purple sphere forward with a motion that shattered the air. A gigantic beam of blue energy ripped through the blackened sky, hurtling straight toward the floating violet sphere in the heart of the storm. The massive orb convulsed violently, its surface fracturing like a dying planet moments from detonation, while savage purple lightning crawled wildly across its cracking shell. The heavens churned beneath layers of rotating storm clouds. Blue light from the force below reflected across every level of the sky, creating a vision straight out of the apocalypse. At the center of the collision, a blinding white eruption ignited, as though two divine powers were crushing each other into oblivion. The surrounding atmosphere trembled beneath unbearable pressure. Blue and violet electricity exploded through the air while the gigantic sphere of destruction appeared to be pierced from within, as if the entire sky itself would shatter into ash in the next heartbeat. Then came the final impact, detonating like the collapse of a star in the heavens. The blue beam pierced directly through the core of the colossal purple sphere, causing the entire mass to erupt in burning white light. Shattered violet fragments exploded across the sky like broken meteors, trailing violent arcs of electricity through the ocean of storm clouds. The blast painted the heavens in two opposing colors, icy blue and annihilating violet. Shockwaves pushed entire layers of clouds apart, while far below, the city's skyline became nothing more than tiny black silhouettes before a force beyond humanity itself. Every glowing fragment spiraled through the air like the remains of a planet that had just been crushed apart. At the center of the explosion, the blue energy continued driving forward without mercy, the final will of a warrior piercing through darkness to seize a fragile hope for a dying world. A colossal pillar of blue energy shot from the earth into the heavens, blazing like the final support holding up a collapsing world. The force inside the white-blue light twisted violently, like an ocean of power roaring within the heart of a storm. Around it, layers of black clouds were torn apart into gigantic spiraling rings. Blue light reflected across the darkened sky, bathing the entire world in a surreal frozen glow. Bolts of electricity raced along the energy column like dragons of light ascending into the heavens. Nothing remained except pure power erupting beyond every natural law, a fury powerful enough to split the sky in two. The energy blast struck Frieza. Massive white lightning carved across the black sky, reflecting against his cold body like living metal, while the gigantic blue pillar erupted like a waterfall of light piercing the heavens, engulfing Frieza completely inside its blinding radiance. The light devoured the darkness itself, causing every surrounding cloud to churn as though set ablaze by a force beyond mortal limits. Frieza vanished completely within the colossal column of light. The gigantic blue energy pillar tore through the sky like the blade of the gods. The blazing beam surged from the earth into outer space, bathing the city below in an icy, surreal blue glow. White lightning twisted violently through the dense cloud layers, flashing like the roar of cosmic wrath itself. Around the pillar, oceans of storm clouds spiraled chaotically inward. Below, the city looked tiny and fragile, skyscrapers swallowed by mist and electric light, while a supernatural battle reached its absolute climax. The vast city lay silent beneath a sky that had just survived the fury of unimaginable power. Enormous clouds still coiled overhead, heavy and dark, but the first rays of sunlight finally pierced through the storm, casting a sacred and hopeful light upon the earth. Skyscrapers emerged faintly through the remaining dust and smoke of battle, reflecting cold silver beneath skies, slowly beginning to clear. Along the horizon, sunlight formed a pale white glow, making the entire city appear as though it were being reborn from the edge of extinction. It was the final moment after every explosion had faded away, leaving only the breath of a world that had survived the apocalypse. A battlefield awakening after the end of the world. Beneath pale sunlight spreading slowly across the horizon, thousands of ruined buildings stretched endlessly into the distance. Thin streams of smoke still rose silently from shattered districts like the dying breath of the nightmare that had swept through this place. At the center, a few towering skyscrapers still stood amid the wasteland like lonely witnesses left behind after a storm of supernatural power. The sky had finally begun to clear, painted in soft blue and pale gold dawnlight, a complete contrast to the devastation below. Gentle sunlight washed over shattered streets, giving the world the feeling of rebirth after annihilation. Amid the ruined remains of a city torn apart by war, a lone warrior sat silently atop a massive slab of concrete like the last king of an ash-covered world. Around him lay countless collapsed buildings, twisted steel beams, and fractured cement stretching all the way to the horizon. No more exploding energy, no more lightning tearing through the sky. Only the crushing silence of a world that had barely survived destruction. Thin trails of smoke still drifted upward in the distance like fading memories of the nightmare that had just passed. Daylight covered the ruins in a cold, silver-gray tone. Faraway buildings leaned crookedly like the skeletons of giants, while Goku remained motionless at the center, silently staring across the city he had just saved. His signature black spiked hair stood against the pale sky. His orange and blue gi was torn apart and covered in dust and ash. He looked utterly exhausted, yet his eyes remained unbroken. His face tilted toward the heavens, his gaze carrying silence, sorrow, and a will that had never faded. Every scar and stain across his body told the story of a battle beyond imagination. This time, we're safe. Subscribe to the channel to see what happens next, Goku said. His eyes, deep black eyes, reflected the exhaustion left behind by a battle fought at the edge of death. His black hair rose sharply against the fading sky like the final symbol of an unconquered spirit. His orange gi hung in tatters, covered in dust and ash, yet the cuts and wounds across his body could not bring him down. Behind him stretched collapsed skyscrapers, broken steel frameworks, and cracked concrete reaching endlessly toward the horizon. Daylight pierced through the lingering dust, painting the world in cold gray and gold tones. Then, a faint smile, almost invisible, appeared on Goku's lips. The smile of a hero who realized that even though everything around him had fallen apart, the fire within him had never gone out.